There are 4 places that I'll look at to get a quick result with a client business. They can do a lot, but they can't do the very most complicated stuff. I cannot go backwards in time. I can't go back to it. It's gone. You become well known. You can become the expert, the preeminent, the best in that niche. Are you using that inventory of hours effectively?
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Welcome to another week of the Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be sharing with you how can you, as a service business owner, make your company more successful. I'm going to be sharing with you my top 4 coaching plays that I use when I'm working with a service business. You know, when I'm working with a service business, whether it be a white-collar service business, blue-collar services, doesn't matter. There are 4 places that I'll look at to get a quick result with a client business. So if you own a service business, pretend that we're doing a one-to-one coaching session right now. And imagine I'm talking directly to you about your business. There are 4 places that I'm going to explore with you. And one of those 4 places is going to mean an extra $1 million of revenue over the course of the next 1 or 2 years. And it's going to probably mean an extra $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 of profit over the next 12 to 36 months. So let's go to these 4 places. Again, as a business coach, one of the things that I can appreciate is I get to see a lot of businesses. I get to see their financials. I get to work with them over the course of 2 years, 5 years, 9 years, 14 years. And so I see what does and doesn't work. I see patterns that way. My brain's just wired that way. So the first thing, if I were working with you, is we're going to take a look at nailing your service offering. Most businesses are going to either go narrow and deep or wide and shallow, and yet what's most common is for a service business to go wide and shallow. What do I mean with that? A wide and shallow versus narrow and deep. Wide and shallow says we do lots of different service offerings to lots of different types of people. You know, we work with education companies, we work with financial service companies. We work with medical companies. I'm pretending I'm an IT services business, for example. We work with small business owners, right? It's a very broad cross-section. So if our marketplace is too broad, or our service offerings, the different service lines that we do, you know, we do painting for commercial painting. We do painting for residential. We do painting interior, exterior. It's too broad with that part. It's hard to make a service business work. So my coaching to you is almost always going to be, when in doubt, I want you to play the odds. When in doubt, play the odds, which means go narrow and deep, niche. It's almost always a better idea for a service business to niche, to go to the fewer markets that they can get really well known in that marketplace. You know, one of the CPA firms that we worked with for years, coaching with them, helping their business, they are now probably the preeminent one in the small real estate investor space. They work with tons of real estate investors that do single-family house and small multifamily stuff. Not the great big 1,000-unit types of facilities, no, but for the people who are doing the smaller projects. That's their niche, and it's worked really well for them. They've written books about that, so they become an expert in that niche. It's an example of going deep, narrow and deep. It's almost always easier. Now, why does that give you an advantage? Number one, you become well known. You can become the expert, the preeminent, the best in that niche. Number two, it allows you to produce on less that you can get really good at, so that you can produce a higher quality service line at a better gross profit margin, because you're not doing 20 things. You're doing 1, 2, or 3 things exceptionally well. And you're not doing it for too many different types of people. Next, the next place I'm going to look at with you is we're going to look at focusing on your most profitable business. So which service lines do you have that are going to make you the most money, or that do make you the most profit? I'm going to give you the coaching from this in a moment, but where did this episode of the podcast came from? You know, several weeks ago, I recorded a podcast, or was released a podcast around the construction field. And I gave my very best plays that if you owned a construction business, here's what I would do with you as your coach with a construction business. And typically one of these 5 plays I shared with you for a construction business is going to make a big difference within a 3 to 12 month period of time. And so I had people who were saying, well, what about service businesses that are outside of construction? So that's what we're doing here. So the second play had to do with focus on my most profitable service lines. And here's my coaching to you. I'm going to have you do a margin analysis and then make sure you take action on what that margin analysis reveals. So what's a margin analysis? Well, a margin analysis says we're going to basically look at our different service lines. For example, the service lines we have might be, I'll go back and I'll use the accounting as an example. I might do monthly write-up work where I do monthly work keeping the books for small and mid-sized companies. I might also do year-end tax preparation work with that part. I might also do payroll services, are pretty common, those types of things. Those 3 are pretty common with that. Well, where do they stand in terms of profitability? What's the gross profit for each of my service lines? You know, there's a cleaning company, actually we work with a lot of cleaning businesses, but one of the cleaning businesses we work with, they do residential cleaning, they do commercial cleaning, and they do special cleaning projects for like, spring cleaning or garage cleaning, that type of thing. What's the gross profit margin for each of those types of jobs? You might find that one has a gross profit of 64%, the other one has a gross profit of 51%, the third has a gross profit margin of 70%. Well, I'm going to look at my service lines by gross profit margin. If you only have one service line, but you do it for lots of different market niches, maybe your key breakdown is not service line, but it might be the markets that you do that for. I do that for the financial, like for an IT services company. We do the same work, but we do it for education, school districts. We do it for small and mid-sized companies. We do it for financial services companies. We do that for medical practices. And so I'm going to list those 4 down. I'm going to ask what's the gross profit margin for each. And then I'm going to also look at those things by scalability, durability, and dominance. Let's take a moment and talk about these. Scalability, durability, and dominance. And I'm going to give them a 1 to 5. Each of those service lines or those market parts, I'm not going to just look at gross profit margins, but I'm going to look at how scalable in a 1 to 5 is that niche. You know, if I can go from, if I say that for example, school districts, I can scale that, and I think that's a 4 out of 5, versus I might say that financial service companies in my area or based on myself, I don't look at that as a very big opportunity. That might be a 2. All things being equal, if the gross profit margins are equal, pick the one with a more scalable score, a higher scalability score. Durability says how long is that business line likely to be there? In other words, if it's a business that you think is going to last for the next few weeks, few months, few years, lower score. You think that's going to be there 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's probably a 5 or a 4 at least. And then we look at dominance. In that market space, how dominant are you as a player? In the competitive world, how dominant are you in that niche, in that area? Give yourself a score of 1 to 5. And so I look at gross profit, scalability, durability, and dominance. And between those 4 scores for each of those service lines or each of those niches that I serve, it's going to make it obvious where I should go. You know, we were coaching a company that did about a little bit over $100 million a year in revenue. And they worked in the energy field. And in their niche, they did this. They had 12 different companies that each had a different service line. And these 12 different companies, they lined them up that way. There were 3 of them that had margins that were less than 5% of their actual bottom line profit from the businesses. And there were 3 of them, or 2 of them, I don't remember off the top of my head, 2 or 3 of them that were closer to 20%. All things being equal, which business are you going to focus in on, right? You want to focus your energy on your most profitable business. What I watch so many service businesses do is they try to be all things to all people, and because of that, they end up with some very profitable pieces of their business surrounded by not so profitable or even unprofitable parts of their business. And that's a really, really recipe for disaster. I want you to niche down. Now, why do they do that? Because the first few years of their business, they remember the scramble to get those early customers or clients to be profitable. And they had their overhead to cover, and they were scrambling for survival. But here they are 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, and they're still emotionally behaving like they did way back when by trying to go after all opportunities. narrow your focus, go after fewer opportunities, but make sure the opportunities you go after are much better for you. We've done that with clients and had them double, triple, 10x their profitability in 3, 5, 7 years by focusing on their most profitable parts of their business. Third thing I'm going to share as a coaching play is this. If I were your coach, I would look at how are you utilizing your staff. In your business, your staff is your greatest expense. In many respects, you think about your staff as your inventory. And it's inventory that goes bad very quickly. If this week, if I've got 10 people and they have 40 hours of producing each of them, I've got 400 production hours of inventory on the shelf this week. Every day that goes past that I don't use that 400 hours of inventory to produce well, it's spoiled. It's ruined forever. I cannot go backwards in time. I can't go back to it. It's gone. So how I utilize staff is hugely important in a service business. So I want to think about that. The one way to conceptualize this is I need to leverage so that my most expensive talent, the best of the best, I use them in such a way that I get the most from them. I don't have them doing low value stuff. I need to leverage my mid-level people to produce what in once upon a time only my most expensive people could. And then I need really good, strong follow-through from what I'll call my admins or my gopher level people. And so let's do this first for a white-collar service business, and then a professional services firm, and then for a blue-collar service business. So let's kind of think of an example for it. In a white-collar service business, for example, let's say I have an IT services company. I might have, if I have a technical staff, I'm going to pretend we have 10 techs in the field. Of those 10 techs, I probably have 2 that are my senior technical people. These people can solve the most complicated, difficult problems. I don't want to waste their time doing things like fixing a printer or doing low-profit types of work. Instead, I want my 6 other techs on the team, who are my mid-level folks, to do a really good job at that mid-tier stuff. And then I might have 2 techs on the team that are in training, and they can do simple stuff like loading up of new software, doing updates on people's computers, etc. My level 1 techs. And I'm going to make sure that I use them in a good way, but they're not the ones that are going to be producing the harder stuff. So what most companies do is they send techs to different jobs based on who's available. That's the wrong way to go. I want to utilize them the very best. I want my best people doing their time on the hardest stuff. And so I might do things like pair up my highest level person with a middle or a lower grade person who can, quote unquote, clean up, so that my surgeon can do brain surgery and let the other people in that operating room do things like prep the OR, sterilize the instruments, etc. I can do that real well. So for example, if I'm going in as an IT services thing and we're putting in Wi-Fi boosters throughout a school, and we're doing that for 5 different schools in the school district, I don't need my best expert on that. I might need him or her early on to figure out the challenge. Which boosters do we need? How many do we need? Making sure that our people are trained in how to put them in the right way. But my mid-level people can do the rest of that. Same thing in a medical practice, right? They go back to that OR thing. You go into a doctor's office. You don't see the doctor initially. You go in there and there's a medical assistant who's cleaned and prepped the exam room, gets the patient's medical record up on the computer, taken vitals, put them into the system, taken a few notes from a few easy questions that go to everybody. Then the nurse practitioner or doctor walks in and she is going to talk with you and do the higher level stuff, and then they leave, and the admin around the office schedules the next parts, makes sure that the prescription gets sent over to the pharmacy if there is one, right? So I want you to think about it as a pyramid, and this is important if you think about it as a pyramid. On the lowest end of that pyramid are what I'll call the admin folks, the gopher folks. So in a construction or a blue-collar services, it might be the people who can clean up, who can move materials from place to place, but they don't have technical expertise. Going up from their one level are your mid-level people. They have some technical expertise. They can do a lot, but they can't do the very most complicated stuff, which are your true experts. The more of what I do that I can push down that expertise pyramid to a lower level, your admin or gophers might be at $20, $30 an hour. Your mid-level people might be at $30, $40, $50, $60 an hour. Your true experts might be at $100, $200, $300 an hour. If I can do that, I can take my expert that used to only be able to service 2 clients in a week. They now can service 4, 6, or 8 clients because I pushed down that work to mid-level people. This would also work, for example, in a law firm, where the work that used to be done by the senior partner in the firm, she might now push down work to associate attorneys or to paralegals or legal secretaries that do quite a bit of the work. You think about how much of the work that you do as a quote-unquote expert is making sure you have the right materials or information on hand. There's scheduling, there's logistics to deal with, there's cleanup to deal with, follow-through after things have been done to deliver, that you might have only 20% of what gets done, 30% of what gets done to be really the expert part. The majority of it's going to be that mid-level or admin can do that. This is how firms now started in medical space and has moved to all kinds of professional service firms and service businesses for that. And the metric you look at is what's your all-in labor cost as a percentage of your revenue. So what you do is you take on what's all my payroll cost, including payroll, taxes and benefits, etc. Let's say that was $1 million, but that's helping me generate a $10 million worth of revenue, which is probably off in most service businesses. The labor burden is going to be much higher, but I want to keep my math easy. I take my $1 million of cost, divide it by my $10 million of revenue. My labor burden in that case is 10%. And that, in a service business, it's going to be higher than that. Of course it will be, but I wanted to keep the math easy. And that labor burden as a percent of revenue is a great metric of a leading indicator for profitability. And in a service business, you want to drive that labor burden percentage down, down, down by staffing down work where you can, by using tools to leverage people. For example, a lot of the medical groups we work with now use kiosks for people when they come in, a new patient wants to check in. Half of them or more can go to the kiosk versus going to the front desk. It allows them to see more patients more efficiently. Software, better tools in a blue-collar service firms, buying your people better tools. My family and I went down this past year to Baja California, Mexico, and we were with a charity group. We built some houses. Now, these were very simple houses that we built because I am not very good at it. Their volunteer team and their staff helped us to do this, but we built a 16 by 20 house for somebody, a family that was there. And when we did that, we were doing the framing, we were using a hammer. When we did the roofing, we were using hammers to do that part. When we were putting the siding and the drywall, we used hammers for the pieces that we put in. Now, if I were in construction, no one's going to use brushes for the painting. No one's going to be using hammers for that. We're going to use an air gun to be much more efficient with what we're doing. Now, they knew that they had volunteers that were probably safer with a hammer that they might hit their thumb on versus the pneumatic guns that might hurt somebody else. Plus, where we were at, they didn't have the money for that. But if it were a construction business, investing in the tools would have been a good idea. So that was the second one, right? The third one, how can we utilize our staff better? Remember, we have a certain inventory of production. Anything I can do to drive that labor burden as a percent of revenue down is really good for my business. The final coaching play I want to talk about ties into that. We call this mastering your expert system. Now, your expert system is probably one of 2 places depending on your service business. It's either the expert system for how you produce your service, your core service that is, or it could be your expert system for how you sell your service. So let's pretend for a moment it's the producing side. And let's say that, for example, you are a dermatology practice. And in that dermatology practice, you have your core offering is what you're doing with just simple annual skin reviews, and then when need be, dealing with skin excisions and pathology to see, is that cancerous or not for what's on somebody's skin. Great. So we get really good on that. I don't want my dermatologist, which I might be paying $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 per year. I don't want to have them cleaning up the exam room. I don't want them seeing 12 patients. I don't want them seeing 20 patients. I want them seeing 30 or 40 patients in the day. So anything I do that makes them more efficient is worth doing. Should they be the one that has to set up the EMR? Should they be the one that's going to make sure that patients were checked in the right way? Of course not. We're going to push that down. So the expert system says, what is the process by which we produce our core service offering? And if we can get that really clean, what it allows us to do is to take what used to be done by experts or mid-level and push that down to a lower labor rate, or even better, to push it down into an automated or a semi-automated or a templated level of that pyramid, that production pyramid. Because the lower down it goes, the less expensive it is. If I can automate it in software, that's the least expensive of that. If I can semi-automate or template it, for in our example here with inside the EMR, that's not as good, but it's better with that. If I can have a lower level person, $12, $18, $24 an hour doing it versus somebody more expensive, that's a really good thing. Your expert system says, how do we produce that? And what do I mean by the expert system for selling? So for example, let's now go the opposite. If we're talking medical, let's go the exact opposite type of service business. Let's say it's a blue collar service business and you're selling, you do plumbing services for commercial buildings. All right, so when people are renovating and doing brand new tenant improvements or building new construction for commercial buildings, your company goes in and does the plumbing work for that, right? Probably in some ways you can look at it as the medical for a building. So you might have master plumbers. Well, those are your most expensive experts on that part. Below there you might have journeyman plumbers, people who are good at what they do, but they're less expensive. Then you might have apprentice plumbers on the lower end who can carry, move, and shift things around, but they're not going to be doing any complicated plumbing work. And then below there you have your admin or your office people. So for example, this might be the project team who makes sure that the right materials are ordered and that are on site for the right times, making sure that the permits were done make sure that the contract parts were done. That expert system for producing. Now the same thing might be there for your business. You might find that, David, in our service business, the hardest part is actually not producing the job. The hardest part is selling the job. So your sales system might be what you're going to process through and do the same thing. How do we make sure that our best salespeople are used to do brain surgery, to close new contracts? They're not going to be scheduling appointments. They're not going to be confirming. They're not going to be worrying about the sales paperwork and preparing the estimates. They're going to have other people who can do as much of that as they can, so that rather than seeing 4 people today, they can see 8 people today about sales opportunities, right? That's an example of using expert systems that way. These are 4 different places for you. The key part with an expert system is it reduces the reliance on the expert. And in most service businesses, the initial expert is you, the owner of the business. And so if you treat yourself like an expert in that expert system and you start to get what only you can do today, whether it be about producing or selling, and you can push it down to your mid-level and or administrative level, or even better into automated or templated types of systems, you've taken a percentage of what only you could do and you've now replicated it inside that pyramid. And even if you can only do that for half of what you do in that expert system, you've reduced the reliance and you've doubled your capacity, because what used to be that you could only do 1, you can now do 2, because half of each of those production pieces were being done by other staff and the systems that you've got and the tools that are in place. It's a big deal. And what happens is over time, not only do you reduce your labor burden percentage, but most importantly, you expand capacity and you reduce reliances on that one expert, because now part of what they knew to do is now in the mid-level or the junior level side of things, and that's much easier to find that type of person than the true expert. So the mid-level people might be a nurse practitioner or PA in a medical business. It might be a legal secretary or paralegal in a law firm. It might be a journeyman in a construction or blue-collar service business. It might be an associate in a consulting type of practice. It's really important for you. And I'm going to give one more place for you to think about managing of labor burden, which are the expectations that are set for your staff. The best place to manage labor burden probably is scheduling. And I'll give an example for this. We were working with a therapy business that was doing occupational therapy. They had, I believe it was 8 or 10 different occupational therapists that work with various people. And generally they were, when we first started coaching with them, the people would on average schedule 23 hours of sessions each week. And then after no shows and reschedules, they would end up seeing 20-ish of those 23, sometimes 21. Which means that if these were full-time team members and each session was less than an hour, then you have to write up notes of an hour per session, they weren't being utilized very well. We talked to the owner of the business and pushed her, we'll call her Gina, we pushed Gina and said, hey Gina, how many do you want your people to see? And she said, well really I want them to see at least 25 people a week. And I said, okay, at least, but let's be clear here. They need some time to write up notes, they need some time for their professional development, they need some time for admin. But really, how many people should they see? When you were doing the work, that I know you no longer see patients, but when you were doing the work, how many did you see on a typical week? She said, well, I was typically at 34, 35. I said, okay, could your people, well, they can't sustain that pace. Okay, well, what could they sustain? And as we went through it, she realized that they should be doing at least 30. I said, how many would you need to schedule for each of these people for them to actually hold 30 of these appointments? And her comment was, well, probably 32 or 33 sessions per week scheduled. So they started doing that. They generated 50% free capacity by the same overhead cost of these people because they were paying them on a salary. Just by going from scheduling 23 to scheduling 32 or 33, they were better utilized and they ended up holding 50% more. Made a massive difference in her practice. Meant hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra profit, and it meant that she was able to serve more people. Plus, they did it in a physical building, this service offering. She had 2 clinic locations, and the clinic locations, the overhead was very expensive. So if they generated $200,000 in monthly revenue or $300,000 in monthly revenue out of these physical locations, same physical overhead cost of the building and the infrastructure, their physical plant, as you might call it, which means that their profit margin went way up from this part. So it wasn't just that revenue went up, but profitability went way up. So going back through here, as we think about this, I want you to think about these 4 opportunities for you. Number 1, nail your service offering. Don't go wide and broad, go deep and narrow. Number 2, what's the most profitable part of your service business? Let's look at and do an actual margin analysis, and then let's look at which ones are more scalable, durable, and where you're dominant in that niche in your area. Next, let's look at how you utilize your staff. Remember, your staff, your production staff, give you an inventory of hours. Are you using that inventory of hours effectively? What's your labor cost burden as a % of revenue? We're going to look at that as a leading indicator to pay close attention to. And then finally, we're going to master our expert system. Probably for how we produce our service offering in a service business. It could be for your sales system or both, but generally we start with our production system first. So, again, this is us ending the coaching session. What's the one of these 4? I don't want you to do all 4, too many. What's the one of these 4 plays, so to speak, that you're going to pick right now? Is it going to be about doing the margin analysis or niching down a little bit more? Or is it going to be about better utilizing your staff or about formally creating your expert system to produce your service offering? Which is it going to be? That if you focused on that one first would give you the biggest payoff. And then over the course of the next 90 days, put a plan in place and get it done. If you need more accountability, reach out to your business coach. If you don't have a business coach, get a business coach to give you that accountability. But take one of these, put it into practice. You will find yourself paid off handsomely for doing that. One idea implemented reasonably well can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional profit for you over the next 12 to 36 months. I've seen it happen time and time again. Well, we've reached the end of the episode. I wish you the very best of luck scaling your service business. Thank you for watching and listening.